guess I watched your video on the that you sent me. It was really good. It had some good information. But then I also, like yesterday, I went and properly read through the manifesto, and I was
Hmm.
just and then interviewing some of the people in the Transmaxxing Discord and stuff like that. I've got kind of I'm not really sure exactly what to make of it because I'm kind of confused. My thought is that it seems to me like a lot of this stuff is just people who are trans trying to make the best of it rather than it actually being about the whole incel thing. But then I go and I read the manifesto, and obviously it's very different to what the people kind of who I interviewed are saying. So I'm just curious if you could just to explain exactly what is the difference between people just transitioning and transmaxing.
Um, it's that's a tough question. I think that there are a lot of similarities between the two. Um, and I would say that there's a lot of people that probably fit into both groups. Like, if you are medically transitioning, if you're transmaxing, you're likely transitioning. Um, so you kind of fit into both groups. It's kind of like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, or something like that.
That makes sense. And then what's the kind of and what is so what do you think about the whole kind of incel thing that it's been painted with, kind of by the media, and how true is that perception? And are there actually people are transitioning because not because they have dysphoria, but because they want to make their lives better? And is that kind of just like a form of cope with them just coming to terms with the fact that they are actually trans and they're just kind of using that as an excuse? Or
Yeah,
yeah.
I do think that it is a little bit of a cope to tell yourself, oh, I don't have dysphoria. I'm not really trans. I just want to transition to make my life better. I think it's a cope. Somebody said it in my YouTube comments, actually. Let me see if I can find exactly what they said. It's just to improve my dating life. It's just to improve my dating life is the ultimate psyop for people who are just trans. LOL. And I think that really does like apply here. A lot of the people that are willing to transmax are would benefit from transition. You're not going to go through the process of becoming more feminine unless that's something that you've thought about and you want to do. Because there's so many other copes that are masculine related. There's like looks maxing to be more masculine, there's fitness maxing, there's career maxing. I don't know. There's all these different ways that you can be more successful masculinely. So if you're choosing to transmax as your solution, as your cope, it means that there's some underlying reason, in my personal opinion. In my
Yeah.
personal opinion.
I can see that that would be and yourself, are you transitioning, are you what's your relation to the kind of community, in like how did you get into it? Are you transmaxing or do you just identify as trans?
Yeah, I've been transitioning for about 2 years. I joined this community about a year ago. So I was transitioning before I joined this community.
Okay.
But I would say that if we're going by the definition of transmaxing being transitioning to improve your life, I do think I would fall under that category. A lot of the reasons that I transitioned were to reduce the negative aspects that I felt with being a guy, which I think a lot of these people that are considering transmaxing also feel. They don't like being a guy. They don't like the social roles. They don't like the pressure. They don't like the interactions they have. They just don't really like the masculine persona or the masculine identity that they've cultivated over the course of their lives. Because often they've built that version of themselves for everybody else. It's just a mask. It's not an authentic, like, they're not authentically super masculine. They're not authentically this manly man. Like, some of them are pretending to be that way
Okay.
because of the pressure from everybody else. So this gives them a way to like release the pressure. And like, when we look at the manifesto specifically, I think the way that it's written allows the people reading it to be very passive, if that makes sense. Like,
That
they
makes
don't need to choose to be feminine. They can be told to be feminine. Oh, it's out of my hands. Like, I want this thing, but I can't do this thing. But if somebody makes me do this thing, you know?
Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of it is a lot of people who would want to do it anyway, but this is giving them the push essentially.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. And then, okay, so there's a couple of quotes from the manifesto I wanted to go through because I think they're some of the more like eye-grabbing. I guess it's supposed to be slightly edgy. I feel like that might be the way that it's framed on purpose.
Hmm.
But so like okay, one of them was males transitioning to female is beneficial for society, since it would allow people to have fun fucking them. Um, and then in the same kind of bit, it's less incels trying to force females to waste times on losers is a good thing. Now, I'm just curious because the way the manifesto's framed, it very much paints it as like, come and do this thing, even if you're not trans, because it would be better. And then I kind of interviewed the guy who compiled it all, and he's a cis male.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of what is there a motive behind this from chasers or something like that as well who wrote it? Because I feel like what the community says about it and what the manifesto says isn't quite in line.
Yeah. I don't think it is chaser motivated. I don't think it was a chaser that wrote this. I do know that the author identifies as a cis male, but I don't think Ventology is a chaser.
I'm curious what you think his motive is for being kind of running a lot of this stuff. I'm curious, like, because that's something I kind of asked, like, why are you interested in helping people? I mean, obviously, people can just be interested in helping people for
Yeah.
no reason, but do you think it's that, or do you think there's something else?
What did he say?
He didn't. He ignored that question, actually. He seems like he's. I don't know exactly. Yeah, he kind of dodged that question. From what I could see, I was just curious. But he compiled the whole thing, so did he write quite a lot of it as well?
Yeah, he wrote
Yeah.
most of it. He has taken excerpts from like the Reddit. He's taken excerpts from a lot of different places to compile it together. Um, but he is the one that does most of the work on it. It
Okay.
is it is an open source file though. So theoretically, anybody can add to it. He's gotten like personal testimonies from people in the community that he just added into the recent editions of it. Um,
Okay. And do you also agree with the statement in there that says less than 10% of males are needed for sex and reproduction?
Say that one more time.
Do you agree with the statement that's in there about less than 10% of males are needed for sex and reproduction?
I how do I answer this? I think that some of the statements made in the manifesto are a little bit not aligned with my worldview. Like, or like you said, some of them are meant to be like eye grabbing, right? Like some of these statements are meant to be eye grabbing. Technically, if we're like okay, if we're speaking completely technically, sure, I guess you only need 10% of the population to be males. That means for every 9 women, there's one guy, right? And like theoretically, for reproduction purposes, I guess that would be fine. I've heard people my whole life just memeing about like how they should kill all men and only keep a couple for reproduction purposes, and that's mainly cis women. So like, I don't think it's being completely serious. Like, oh, we need to kill all men or force all of them to transition. I don't think that's where that's going. I think it's kind of just like, in theory, we only need these percentages to successfully continue with the human population. It's kind of like the other statement you said, where it's like society will benefit from being able to fuck people once they transition. Like technically yes, theoretically yes, but in practice, I don't know if it would actually shake out like that. Like, does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. That does indeed. So generally, it's kind of just. I mean, most of the community I found, it's like I said, I was talking to you in text about how the stories that are out there, I don't think are really reflective of what's really going on.
They're not.
There is a little bit in the manifesto about inducing dysphoria, but it kind of, again, it seems like it's really there to just kind of be edgy.
Yeah.
So the thing I was thinking of, which is, I guess it's because it's in close proximity to time-wise to when the transmaxing thing kind of came out.
Hmm.
So it's kind of been talked about. It's the now there's something to do with a Discord user called Reiko 33333. Is that the Harem trans cult? It's been labeled as. Is that something is there any kind of crossover between that and this, or is there any? Because that's something that it's been kind of conflated.
Did you watch those two videos? There's two videos on YouTube that I've seen that talk about Reiko's harem femboy cult.
Yeah.
Um, I personally, I don't know. I wasn't involved in that community, so I can't speak definitively. But looking at how the media is covering transmaxing and looking at how people are talking about transmaxing, I would imagine that Reiko's cult of femboy harem is probably pretty similar in that they were like encouraging people to transition and people transitioned and then other people are like, oh, you're grooming lonely men.
Yeah.
um
I mean,
so
do
I,
you?
I I don't think they're connected. I don't know if they're connected. I don't it's okay. I don't know if they're connected, but I think the representation of Reiko's group could also be influenced by cultural transphobia, I guess. Just kind of the same reason that the way that they talk about it now about transmaxing is really negative, when in reality, it's just saying that people should transition if they think they're going to benefit from transition.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely see that. And do any is it common for people to kind of change their minds before I guess starting more permanent changes like HRT or stuff like that? I mean, obviously I'm not interested in regret stories or whatever. They're very sad, but I don't think they're representative of the entire community. I'm just kind of interested if people stop before they kind of commit to the process very often.
Mm, I think a lot of people can be hesitant, especially in the beginning of their transition. It's a pretty big change to make. You're taking hormones that are going to completely change your body. You're opening yourself up to a lot of societal judgment. There's a lot of like mental brain worms around being trans for a lot of people, or just around trans people, because most people don't really understand what it's like to be trans. They don't understand what the trans community is. They're so isolated away from trans people that when you're trying to accept yourself as trans, all you have are these negative stereotypes. All you have are these like negative things that you've been told, negative media that you remember seeing, like what is that one? Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Hmm.
or just any of the like modern, I don't want to say modern, but like past 10 years ago in the past, all of the representation for trans people is negative. It's talking about how weird they are, how they're perverts, how they're groomers, and it's just not, it's just transphobia. It's that societal transphobia that I mentioned earlier.
No, I,
Um,
I can see that.
so yes, to answer your question, there are people that like are nervous. There are people that decide not to transition. A lot of them would be called like reppers or repressors. Like they have these feelings. The feelings don't go away, but they're afraid to take the actions because of the implications that come with it, or like the other people around them.
Yeah, I understand that. I think. So okay, can I ask you the basic kind of questions that I put forward for everyone in the group as well? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Cool. So what stage of the process in transitioning are you? I think I may have asked that at the beginning, but just in framing of the question.
yeah. So I've been on HRT for about 2 years. I came out to the people closest to me like 2.25 years ago. So like a few months before I started HRT. Um, and then I boy moded, or that's what it's called, where you don't come out socially to a lot of people. You just like continue dressing and acting like a boy essentially for like 14 to 15 months. And at this point, I'm full time presenting as myself, however people perceive me. Usually it's either femininely or like androgynously, or sometimes they think I'm like a Twinkie boy. I don't know. Um, but I'm out in all regards of my life at this point. There's nobody that I'm still like in the closet, quote unquote, to.
And how if this is okay to answer, how far are you planning to go? Are you getting facial surgery? Are you will you be doing top and bottom surgery, or are you just doing some? I mean, I'm just sorry if it's too personal. Don't worry about answering. But if you want to answer, please do.
No, you're fine, because I think questions like that are helpful for other people that are listening. Because likely I am going to upload this, just so you know.
Okay, no, that's fine. I probably will too. So that's great. That's good to know. Or if you upload it, I'll promote your one. That works even better.
Okay, yeah.
Cool.
But I don't know. I do get a lot of dysphoria around a lot of parts of my body. And I'm not sure if surgery would fix them. Like theoretically, like that's the point of the surgery, to fix the dysphoria. But I don't know if I want a full genital reconstructive surgery, or GRS, or SRS is another way that it's all commonly known. I have thought about getting like an orchiectomy, just removing my testicles. But I do get nervous because I feel like that is an operation that seems to have some weight. Like physically castrating myself is big. And even though I've been transitioning for 2 years, I still do have a lot of anxiety around like medical operations, and the fact that I'm kind of like a doomsday person. I really don't think society is going to be vibing for super long. So then I think about like post collapse. How am I going to keep hormones in my body, or am I just going to like slowly die of osteoporosis? Um, but that's just me like being anxious. My therapist tells me I shouldn't worry about that, but
Oh, it's hard not to. I can see why you would worry, especially if you have the view like that's quite logical. I mean, I think about the world ending a lot, so yeah, that any full time medication that you need at the end of the world is obviously an issue. It doesn't really matter what it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
But then on that same note, I asked myself, like, if the world were to collapse, would I even want to stay alive and remasculinize? Like, would I rather die in the event of the world ending, or just live like, with osteoporosis?
Mm.
Or would I rather remasculinize?
Do you
And
have
when I,
what's the the osteoporosis? Is that a result something that happens if you stop taking hormones? Or sorry, I've not heard that before.
oh yeah, so osteoporosis is like a decreased bone density. And if you don't have any primary sex hormones in your body, testosterone or estrogen, you do heavily increase your risk of osteoporosis.
Okay.
A lot of
Yeah.
a lot of old people get it, and then there was some commercial that used to like say if you had it, you were entitled to compensation. Well, no, I don't know if that was osteoporosis actually, but yeah, it just decreased bone density, basically. It makes it more likely that your bones break, shatter, fracture, things like that.
Okay, cool. And the next question, thank you for answering that, by the way. The next question is, what led you to take this path? Why do you feel it would be better for you?
Yeah, I hmm, I tried really hard for about 20 years. Well, I was the first 20 years of my life. I tried really hard to be like a successful guy, learn how to, be a man up, all the stereotypical phrases. And I couldn't really find satisfaction. I was always I always felt like I was pretending to be somebody else. How would a man act in this situation? How would specific men that maybe I'm like trying to model myself after, how would they act in this situation? Um, but it didn't really, I don't know. It never brought the satisfaction that I wanted. Um, and additionally, like looking back, I always had like this pit in my stomach, and I used to just call it like the void. Um, but I think a lot of my quote unquote void, that like nothingness that I felt inside, came from trying to be somebody that I wasn't. But I was so far removed from like who I wanted to be, and I had so many brain worms about like needing to be a man, or like all these copes that we were talking about earlier, that like I didn't even consider transitioning or like being more feminine. Because I'd be like, no, I can't do that. Men don't do that. Um, that's gay. I don't want to be gay. Like, I don't know. It was. I tried very hard to make sure that my social image was perceived as very masculine. And it didn't make me happy. And then for a long time, I was reading like Reddit r/MTF. I was reading trans people forums. I was reading content, and I was consuming media that was trans adjacent and I'd be like, oh, that's interesting, but I could never do that. And I think in my head, I knew that I wanted to do that. Like, I remember researching how to take hormones. What hormones do you take? When I was like 15, 16. But I was too afraid to ever say anything. I was too afraid to actually take any action on it. So I just kind of suppressed it and kept being a man for another couple years. But anyways, eventually I moved out of my house, out of my childhood home, where like I think a lot of the pressure to act in the way that I did developed because of like my family and like the house that I lived in. So I moved out. I went to college for a little bit. I still really tried to like keep myself masculine. It wasn't really the vibes. And then after my first year of college, I actually dropped out. Because I was just really depressed. I didn't want to go back to school. It was the same year COVID happened. So like I got sent home. I really was struggling with online. So I just dropped out. And then I started working at a job. So then I had like disposable money and insurance. So I could start going to the doctor.
Are you
And
based in America then? Is that where you
yeah,
are? Or yeah, okay.
yeah, I'm in America.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then at that point I was able to look further into it probably from the time that I was in college, like that year that I was there, the year that I dropped out, and then I started transitioning like a year after I dropped out. So for those 2 years, I spent a lot of time researching, getting familiar, like researching even more, getting even more familiar with the trans community, and just spending a lot of my time like fantasizing, or not even fantasizing, but just like hating myself and desiring this like parallel world that I had been building for years in my head, of like the world where I did get to wake up as a girl, or where I did to be more fun, or like world where I went this masculine guy. And then I started transitioning because I don't know, I was not happy. I was quite depressed. And I didn't want to go lower, I think. Um, I kind of like reached the point where I was either going to repress even harder and like lean further into masculinity, which likely would have ended up killing me. I was going to kill myself because how depressed I was, or I was going to transition. Um, so we transitioned because
Okay.
that was the best of the options.
Okay, great. Sorry. Was, someone else in the community is asking me if they want to do a voice or two. So I wanted to ask as well. Do you think that it's possible that some people would be able to live in any body happily? So that someone could switch and not have dysphoria because of it, or could not switch and not have dysphoria? Do you think there is someone like that who actually exists, or do you think that it always kind of lands in a binary?
Mm, I think it can be flexible. I think there are some people who would be kind of satisfied in whatever body that they have. Um,
Hello.
hmm.
Hmm, sorry.
Maybe some, because there are people that they identify more as like gender fluid. But then, actually, upon saying that, I don't know if they would be happy with any body that they could receive, or if they would just have some dissatisfaction with anybody. Like maybe there are things that they like and things that they dislike about a male body, and then same about a female body. Um, so I don't really know. It's a fun like philosophical question, but like it's not really practical because unfortunately for
No,
all
I know.
trans people, we
I
can't
mean, it's a bit of
body.
a sci-fi question to be honest, because I'm kind of thinking, 200, 300 years from now, who knows how it will all work? We may be able to use brain trips to switch between bodies, and I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Yeah, I'm just curious, kind of. I guess what you kind of think of a world like that. Do you think that most people would end up picking? Do you think it would become almost like an item of clothing? What if that technology were to exist?
If that technology were to exist, this just like I just made this up, so don't quote me on it. Well, you can quote me, I guess, because we're recording this and we're gonna upload it, so it's there for the internet forever. But if that were a world that exists, I kind of think it would be like, have you seen Avatar, like Blue People?
Yeah.
You know how they build the body, or like they like grow the bodies? like in those like those chambers, they like grow the avatars.
Yes, yeah.
I think that might be something that happens. Like people can elect to grow their own avatars and then like brain transplant into the body of their choice, maybe. Um, but in that regard, that would be bringing it to the physical world. But the other, I guess, route that people take, even today, is kind of creating a digital avatar that they feel more closely resembles them. Um, like if you look at a lot of or just trans people profile pictures, a lot of them are like either anime pictures of like how they wish they could look, or they're generated AI images, or like just generated images, generated profile pictures that they've created of their ideal avatar. Or if
Yeah.
you think about like VR chat or like other online just places where you have a lot of customizability to choose what your character looks like. Um, that's kind of something that already happens.
Well, I'm also curious as a kind of follow up question. Do you see a lot of crossover with, because I was investigating the Vtuber community a while ago, and do you see much crossover with them? Because it feels like that's almost it seems like it would be a pretty good match.
Yeah, I haven't personally done a ton of like interaction with the VTuber community. I'm sure there are some VTubers in the Transmaxxing community. I haven't heard them like be super vocal about it, but I could see there being a lot of overlap.
And then okay, so this is the other question is how would you know if transmaxing is right for someone? So describe if you can the type of male that should undergo this. Someone who's assigned male at birth, just like in the manifesto, it makes some pretty like rigid statements on what it thinks should and shouldn't do it. But what to you personally is the perfect person who would be a candidate for it? Obviously, someone suffering with dysphoria, I would assume. But is
Yeah.
there
Well,
yeah
actually, no, that's not what I'd say quite. But I am personally a little bit more progressive than the manifesto in terms of who should transition. I think I'm pretty sure the manifesto is pretty strict in that, like, if you're over 25 or if you look certain ways, or it's like you said, it's very rigid in like who should and who shouldn't. Um, Personally, I think that the objective of transmaxing or just transition in general is to improve your life. Um, so putting all of the rigidity on it, and a lot of that rigidity is social influence. They're like, oh, don't do it after this point because then you won't pass.
okay.
And personally, I have met a lot of older trans people that have repressed for their entire lives. And they don't care about the social impact of transition usually. They did for a long time, and that's what like made them so miserable. But then like there's even people in the transmaxing community that are older, they're 30, 40, 50. And they come in and they're like, I don't really care what other people say. Like I want this to change me. I'm happy that it's changing me. And like I don't know. It's more person based. Anyway, sorry, that did not answer your question. But to answer your question, who do I think should transition, should transmax? I think that if you deeply hate your masculinity, or like being perceived as not even hate, but if you're just like neutral or negative on your masculinity and you're scared of the idea of femininity, or you like really desire femininity, but you're scared to like show it publicly, I think that you should explore the mental blocks that are coming up, because that sounds like a lot of mental blocks. And through your exploration of your own mental blocks, of your own identity, like maybe transition is right for you. Maybe it's not right for you. But I don't know. This is so hard because I don't want to give like prescriptive, everybody should do X or nobody should do
No.
Y.
So I guess the next question is kind of it phrasing in a different way. So if I've written it in this kind of way to frame it, but if a Chad type with everything going for him decides to transmax and transition, would it be advised against by the community? So let's think like 6'1", perfect guy, high value male. Would you say that that's someone who should do it if they have dysphoria, or would you say that you should advise against that.
Okay, so the community is very split. There's a lot of different people. Like as you've noticed, like the community responses are often very different from both the manifesto, but it's also the community is very different from the community itself. There's so many different people there. So some would say like, no, that person should not transition because of the fact that they're a Chad, quote unquote. I'm assuming they're getting laid. Like compared to a lot of the people that might be considering transmaxing, they're going to be seen as like, oh, you're in a good spot, you shouldn't transition.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that for the person specifically, you know, they have dysphoria, you mentioned. It doesn't really matter that they're a Chad, so it doesn't really matter that they're attractive. It doesn't really matter that they're tall. If they're dysphoric, those feelings aren't going to go away, likely. And likely they're not super satisfied. Like dysphoria is the dislike of masculinity. It's not like the negativity in your body. Like dysphoria, gender dysphoria for trans feminine people is a dislike of the masculinity or like of the like masculine self, right? So like if this person is dysphoric, it doesn't matter if they're a Chad, it doesn't matter if socially they're doing okay. They're probably pretty miserable. So personally, I would tell them the same thing that I just said. Like, you should explore, and like maybe that exploration leads them into transition. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I don't really think that people should say like yay or nay, you should transition based on external attributes and also based on social pressure.
Okay, that's reasonable. That makes sense. Sorry, the follow-up question, next question is, what kind of, so the incel part of this about it starting on 4chan, is that true that this community is mostly that, or is it a kind of just a general trans community with some more kind of, because it seems like it's a support group for anyone who's transitioning from male to female. But why is the media jumping onto the incel thing so much?
Yeah, let me pull up the data. There's a poll running in the Transmaxxing Reddit right now, asking people if they were identified as incel beforehand, and I'm just trying to find a most recent screenshot of that so I can read the data to you. There were 150 votes. 29 said yes, they identified as incel and they later transitioned. 26 said no, I did not identify as incel and I later transitioned. 14 said yes, I previously identified as incel, but I never transitioned. 63 said no, I did not previously identify as incel and I never transitioned. 5 said that they were born female and they identified as femcel or incel. And 13 said that they were born female and never identified as femcel or incel. So from this just small like group, and this is from the Transmaxxing subreddit, which if we're thinking about who's coming to the Transmaxxing subreddit, it's likely people that have not started their gender exploration. I would say that there's going to be more people joining the Transmaxxing community that are cis man presenting than trans woman presenting. It's going to be the people that are like curious about this rather than the trans women who already have communities or like who are already like firmly ingrained in their communities, confident in their communities, that kind of thing. Anyways, so the majority of these people did say that they identified as incel, 29 to 26. So from that, it's about half. So it's not like it's some overwhelming majority. But I think a lot of the hate is just hating autistic men. Because a lot of the incel community is, sorry, you watched my video, so like you already know this, but a lot of the incel community is neurodivergent, autistic. And I think that the stigma around that, like the social stigma around neurodivergence, is kind of similar to the social stigma around trans people, in that we're both demonized for nothing, or not for nothing. There are bad people in all groups, but the vast majority of incels are just like upset with their social perception and the way that they're treated. Like they're upset with the way that they're interacted with socially, and they're really lonely. And like one of the incel creators that I speak to, that I'm friends with, it likens it to like Aesop's Fable of the Grapes, where like the incels don't hate people. They're spiteful that they're being left out of all of the things that the people are claiming that they do have access to. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. That does make sense. And then the question that I had before was, do you think that it's possible that some people have like a temporary induced dysphoria, maybe due to trauma or maybe due to something like that? And do you think that could be a response, or do you think those people are essentially just kind of eggs?
So this one's complicated. I haven't. Okay,
Sorry. So to provide context, because you mentioned as well the doctor who was rubbing estrogen cream to make his skin softer, and he ended up inducing kind of dysphoria on himself. Obviously, there's a medical reason for that. But
wait. I
did
didn't
you?
mention that, but
Oh,
I
sorry,
read
I've they'd read
here
that.
too,
Sorry, yeah.
so I can talk to them
Okay.
about that, because that would be cool. But I have heard of that before. And I have heard reports from other people who said that they like developed dysphoria after time taking estrogen. Um, I don't know the validity of if the estrogen. Okay, how do I phrase this? One of the people is in the Transmaxxing server. You probably talk to them realistically if you've been talking to people from over there. And they had told me that they transitioned without dysphoria, and they transitioned 6 months later. They started developing dysphoria, and one of the things that I was talking to them about was that dysphoria is the negative feelings regarding masculinity, and then euphoria is the positive feelings regarding femininity for trans femmes. You know, as you're like becoming less of one, more of the other. And when I had explained it in a way that maybe they hadn't heard before, they were like, "Oh, maybe I did have dysphoria before," because they hated being a guy. They did not like being a man. Um, so in that way, maybe that doctor was repressing these feelings, and then they started taking estrogen, and they were like, "Oh crap, I actually really like this." And then like, what's the? I'm gonna use another analogy. It's the cave one. At Plato's allegory of the cave.
Yep. Yeah. I
Like
know that. Yeah.
once you've left the cave, once you've like realized that you're just repressing, once you've realized that you're just coping by trying to be a man, you can't go back in the box. Like there is no, I don't know, there is no I don't know. From what it sounds like, everybody's different. There are exceptions to any rule. But once you have realized that like you're not happy as a man, I imagine it will be hard to get those thoughts to go away. So maybe that's what's happening with like that doctor, or like with other people who end up starting their transition and then being like, "Oh wait, I actually don't want this." And then, that the thoughts are there because they're like, "Wait, do I want this? Do I like this?" I don't know.
Um. Okay.
That
Cool.
didn't answer the question. Oh my gosh.
Well, it's a complicated question. I can understand why it's difficult to answer. Because it is very anecdotal as well. All of the stuff. I'm not sure there's huge amounts of data sets on it yet. Um.
Oh wait, I did want to answer in response to the trauma thing that you said though.
Yeah.
I haven't done nearly enough research into this to be speaking definitively. So all this is kind of just like loose, up in the air, nothing set in stone. But I think that a lot of, I don't think trauma will be the cause of gender dysphoria, but I think that there does come a lot of trauma from identity suppression, and being forced to like deny certain parts of yourself because of the people around you. Like, for example, I was reading this paper about, so it was about identity development, and the author, they made a joke about how their son really liked to wear mermaid costumes when they were like 4 years old. And then they were like, and you can imagine the kind of reaction that that's going to get. And then later in the paper that they were talking about, they talked about how, like, after they got teased, like, this kid stopped wearing mermaid costumes and now they like play football and they're super masculine, they're a jock. And I'm not going to say that this person's kid is or isn't trans, but I think that if we look at like just that, if we look at that situation isolated, right? There's a young child that's just living, they're just existing, because there's nothing inherently feminine or masculine about liking a mermaid costume, right? Anybody can like Ariel the Little Mermaid. Um, but in the response to that, in getting teased or made fun of or like bullied for liking mermaids, wearing a mermaid costume, you might lean the opposite way and go full fledged into this like jockhood or like super manly, like, I need to be masculine. I'm not allowed to be feminine because it's not safe. Like, it's just not a safe thing to do. And I think that there's a lot of trauma in that. And then people like to take that, like that trauma around the suppression of self, and say that, oh no, you're just traumatized. That's why you're trans. Rather than like realizing that they're traumatized because they're being forced to be inauthentic. Like, they're being forced to mask from a very young age to live up to the societal standards of whatever labels have been placed on you. If you're born with a penis, you're labeled a male or a man or a boy, and you're expected to act like a male or a man or a boy. And the same thing with like a vagina and woman. Like, I don't know.
Okay, and I guess can I ask as well? So that kind of obviously it seems like you are of the view that gender is a kind of societal thing. So can I ask in that vein, what in your thoughts does it mean to be a man, or what does it mean to be? And then the follow up question was, what does it mean to be a woman? Like, what are those societal things that you think are kind of attached to each one?
Yeah, I hmm Hmm. Okay. So man and woman are like these social roles, these social identities. Like, if you talk to most cis people, they're just going to tell you that there's men and women. Men act X way, women act Y way. And then they're going to follow it up and be like, well, anybody can act anyway. But in practice, people are criticized for not following in line with the expected roles. Um. So when you ask, like, what is a man, what is a woman, I would say it's somebody that identifies with the label. But as I was growing up, the issue that I had with this was that I thought man was somebody who was born as a boy, and a girl was somebody who was, and a woman was somebody who was born as a girl. And in that, I also felt really constrained to all the social expectations associated with them. Like, when you hear phrases such as like, men have to be tough, or like, you need to man up and stop crying, or like, I don't really know what they say over in the UK, but like,
Similar
over
stuff,
here
yeah.
I have heard that a lot myself from both my family as well as just like stranger men, as well as women heavily enforced and like pushed me into that role. And then also, like, peers, like, your friends are going to tease you if you do things that are not masculine when you're a man, quote unquote, if they're coming from the same like background. So what is a man? What is a woman? I keep circling back to this. It's fucking complicated.
I want to just be clear. The question I was phrasing is what it means to be, not necessarily what is, because I almost think that that question is kind of slightly divisive and doesn't actually give you any useful answer. So what I mean by what does it mean is the labels that are attached to it. Like, what are the societal things that are attached to those labels? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. So in Western culture, and I'm just gonna go based on like my research rather than personal experience because it just makes it easier to talk about this. So in okay, so first to set the groundwork, both the U.S. and the U.K. to a large extent, I'm pretty sure. I'm assuming you're from the U.K. You sound like you're from the U.K. That might
I
be
am,
me.
yeah. I
Yeah.
am, yes.
Um, but both of our cultures are largely masculine societies. And what a masculine society means is that there are different expectations for people deemed to be men and people deemed to be women. There's a lot of emphasis on like women are, well, generally speaking specifically about our cultures, not all masculine cultures. At least, no, speaking specifically about US culture, because I don't even know UK culture. There's a lot of emphasis on women to be caring and like I don't I kind of want to say like a supportive role. Maybe like they're meant to support children. They're meant to support men, such as in positions like assistants or like secretaries. And then men are deemed as like they're supposed to lead and like they're supposed to be authoritative. They're supposed to be stoic and strong and like this rock for the other people to support. And together, you know, this like yin and yang of like super masculine guy, super stoic, you know, he's just going to be tough AF, tough as nails, and this woman that can help, and he's going to provide as well. He's a provider. Um, he's going to provide for a family that this woman is going to be able to run and manage, and like she's going to support him and support the house and support the kids. Um, and in that is kind of like indicative of the way that men versus women are seen by society of like, are you being somebody who is a provider? Are you being somebody who is stoic? You're crying. That's not what men do. Men are strong so that women and children can cry. Women or men give themselves so that women and children can survive. That kind of thing. Um, But that's just like in highly masculine cultures. Now, in more feminine cultures, gender roles are a lot more equal. There's a larger focus on everybody's well-being and like health. Childcare is expected to be split up more evenly in more feminine cultures. Um, Women are like labor is spread more equally. Women are seen as stronger. Like basically, sorry, I'm just running in circles, but what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman is different depending on the culture that we look at. So unfortunately, in the culture that I grew up in and the one that's like, I don't want to say my instincts, but like the ones that my body gives gut reactions for are often heavily patriarchal and like masculine based. And I even have a lot of uncomfortability around the disconnect from like the way that I live up to female standards or the way that I live up or the way that I lived up to like male standards. Because that's like what's ingrained in my brain. And that's something difficult. So, so, so I think that trans trans people. Oh, wait, time out. Give me a second. What does it mean one? Okay. So it's like an identity thing. I don't know. You like identify one way or the other, or like what you desire to be perceived as.
And I guess, in a sense, the gender roles that you feel more comfortable as well, which society has put onto the labels of man and woman. Is that right?
Kind of. If you say it like that, a lot of people will get confused or just not understand because a lot of them have had to just completely dismiss certain parts of their lives because of these gender roles. For example, you know that 4-year-old boy with that mermaid costume, he gets teased, and maybe now he hates mermaids because he got bullied for having a costume of one. And like, who knows if he actually likes mermaids? Like from his actions, from his decision to get a mermaid costume, obviously that this little boy likes mermaids. But because it's seen as feminine, it gets criticized. So now this little boy might grow up thinking, I hate mermaids. When in reality, he just didn't like getting ostracized for wearing the mermaid costume. Like, does that make sense? So he will
That makes
feel
sense.
uncomfortable with it because of the social pressure.
That makes sense. Okay, cool. And then moving on to the next question, slightly different subject, is so the support for the female to male is not so much a big part of the transmaxing community. Why do you think that is? Or I read in the manifesto the reasons, but it's again it's a very like we said, it's very rigid. So I'd like to kind of hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yeah. From the perspective of transmaxing, you read the manifesto, you see what he says. He talks about like societal benefits. Personally, I don't really agree with a lot of the viewpoints surrounding FTM people that are like quote unquote official transmaxing scripture.
Mm.
I think that the reason that he focuses, or like, I think the reason that he targets them like he does is because transmaxing is primarily focused on males to females. Originally, his target was incels, which most incels are male, or male presenting, male assigned. So I think that his target and his primary focus and his like, I don't want to say who he's worried about internally, but like the level of applicability is just a lot more for MTFs. And I think, how do I phrase this? It might also be a similar kind of Aesop fable of the grape situation where there's like an envy of people that were able to be born and assigned female at birth. And it's maybe like, why would you give up the starting point that you have? But that's I can't confirm that. I've never like talked to Ventology about it. But I hear that a lot from cis women in my life, actually, talking about my decision to transition to female, and they're like, "Why would you do that? Like, why?" Or mainly like the older women in my life will be like, "Why would you give up all of the benefits that you had? Why would you give up this role that you were given, this good role, in order to become this other thing?" And I think it might be something similar like that. It's like, why would you give up being a woman to become a man? Like, why would you ever want to be a man? Personally, I I support FTM transitioners. I support trans masks. I support all kinds of gender diversity. I think that everybody is just trying to make the happiest life for themselves. And again, I don't think you should make a decision to transition or not transition based on social pressure or like your externalities. And it seems like a lot of the reasons against FTM transition in the manifesto are social pressure, which like you know how I feel about that, as
Yeah.
because I keep mentioning it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then I want to ask as well. So are most of the men who come into this group pre FTM, are most of them gay? And if not, how do they deal with the idea that the probability that most of their dating pool after would be men? I mean, obviously there would be trans women, there would be all that, but primarily the dating pool would be of men. How do they deal with that reality?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure. Hmm. That question also seems like interesting because it sounds as if it's so like authoritative, but it really sounds like it came out of the manifesto, and I have no clue if it's accurate or not.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it was asked based on what it says in the manifesto. That was kind of where that framing of a question came from.
I think that. Hmm. I think okay. Let me hit this in two parts. A lot of people do come in maybe earlier or really early in their transition, or even before they start their transition. Um, but usually, you don't really come into a space like transmaxing unless you've been thinking about related topics, or you're a chaser. You're just searching for trans women, which a lot of chasers do end up being trans women as well. Or you're just a troll and you want to come and like hate on trans people. Those are like the three main types of people that we get.
I would think any troll trying to do that might have to look at themselves and wonder why they're obsessed with it as well, though.
No,
Um,
100%, 100%. That's exact. Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh. Um, yeah, no, a lot of the trolls. They'll fit right in this community in like a couple years.
Yeah.
Um, I think some of them may be surprised, maybe. But for a lot of people, it's like a secondary thing. Like you're not really worried about your dating life. Well, some of them are. Um, but that's because that's like the masculinity cope of
Well,
like,
I guess
oh,
the other reason I'd ask that is because obviously it's kind of been pushed as maybe a solution to inceldom. So one would assume that the people who are incels doing it, they would, I guess, also benefit from the reduction in sex drive, but also would be interested in, getting laid. That's kind of one of the reasons, is it not?
it is one of the reasons. It's complicated though because it doesn't really. Sorry, the guy next to me was looking at me. Hmm. It is one of the reasons, but I don't think it is any. Shouldn't say anybody. There's always exceptions to the rule, but I don't think it's most people's primary reason to transition. It might be what they say to people. It might be like the cope that they give. They're like, oh, I just don't want to be an incel, so I'm going to be a tranny. Well, I shouldn't say that word. Oh, I'm going to be a trans woman. They're likely going to say the T slur, but um, I think that a lot of them just really hate like the forced masculine identity that they have, and with being a man, it like in this, under this patriarchal society, comes with being like a conqueror as well. Like you're able to get laid, like oh, it feels so gross because this is like red pill talk, but like you're able to like go out and like conquer women essentially. And a lot of these people hate that because one, they're not very successful with dating and like social interactions. They're not very good with like sociality. And second, a lot of them just really don't want to like go out and be conquerors. But they tell themselves that they have to. So then, leading into that, no, that's one of those masculinity copes. They're able to say like, well, let me just transition to get laid better. And like in their head, and this is just a headcanon, this is not official, this is not based on science, this is just me rambling because I don't know how to shut the fuck up. In their heads, they're probably maybe along the lines of like, maybe I can be more of a man if I transition to get laid than I'm able to be by being a man as a man. Um,
That's some impressive mental gymnastics, but kind of makes logical sense in some way. Um, I guess. And then I guess a follow up to this would be with all the manosphere stuff that's been going on now. Like, what's the kind of opinion on all of that sort of stuff that's going on? Like the Andrew Tates and things like that. What is the kind of, I guess, the opinion of this sort of community on that sort of subject? Um,
well, I can only speak for myself. I I think that oh jeez, people like Andrew Tate are kind of similar to like Jordan Peterson in some regard, where like young male presenting people are looking for role models to help them figure out their masculinity, to help them figure out how to be successful as men. Um, and I don't want to say standing in to be the role models that didn't exist, but like that's what it seems like a
no,
lot of these men do. They give you like how to be a man, how to be a good, how to be a successful human, things like that.
and
Um,
in a way, the self-betterment of the transmaxing thing is kind of for assigned male of birth people almost. It's not the same because like you said, there's no kind of father figure filling in thing, but it is kind of about making yourself the best you can possibly be. It just puts the masculinity thing to one side.
yeah,
Is that yeah? So
I
do
would.
you think this is what a similar vein of people might have been searching for with those sort of things? You mentioned Jordan Peterson. He talked about becoming a V cell. So, do you think that this is kind of, I don't know, is there's some sort of pipeline from Jordan Peterson to transmaxing?
Maybe one that is correlation rather than causation. Because I don't know, let me ramble for a second and just brainstorm out loud. People that are searching for people, or like people that are being fed Jordan Peterson videos, are looking for, likely they're looking for life advice. They're looking for like, how do I live my life? And Jordan Peterson, people give him a lot of shit. He does have some good points. I don't like his posturing of things to be very masculine and feminine centered. That's kind of what I meant earlier when I talked about like masculine societies, patriarchal societies. He talks about how men should be, and then like the other side of that coin is like women are this other thing. Um, when like I think that all people, or not all people, a lot of people could benefit from some of the things that he's saying in terms of like confidence and like how to interact with people. And like Jordan Peterson is a very smart man. He has a lot of wisdom. He's lived a lot of life, and people come to him for life advice. Not all of his life advice is good. He does have a lot of harmful statements, and his viewpoints on certain groups aren't the greatest. Specifically, the group that I'm in, like being trans, not transmaxing specifically, but I think that people that are looking for him are looking for content to help make their lives better, and people that are looking at transmaxing are also looking for life advice. So there may be some number of people that are the same between both of them, but I can't say like if you watch Jordan Peterson, you're gonna transition like that. My personal headcanon around both of these groups is that there's a lot of social issues in the groups due to neurodivergence, due to social anxiety, due to trauma. So maybe that's the pipeline, traumatized child to,
Yep.
I don't know, self-help guru pipeline or something. But I don't think there's any specific like Peterson to transmaxing pipeline.
Okay. And then I'm just going to wrap it up with the final question, which is, do you think that sexuality and gender is a choice or is something that's fixed? And you've kind of answered this throughout, but I don't know if we just get a direct answer to that question.
I don't think it's fixed. I think it's actually incredibly complicated because like one thing for example is like me 10 years ago. I'm well, let's do 5 years ago. So I'm a little bit older, not an 11-year-old, but me 5 years ago, I'm 16, right? I'm a 16-year-old boy at the time. My sexuality is that based off of me today, or is that based off of me like as a boy? Like if I'm talking about me at 16, is my 16-year-old sexuality based off of my social identity, which is like I'm a man, or is it based off my internal identity of like I'm just a person? I don't know who the fuck I am. Or is it based off of like me eventually, now in transition, now I'm female identifying, like is my sexuality based off of it now? So it's fluid in that like you as a person are always changing. Sexuality is just a label to describe how your attraction to other people is based on your presentation. So that one's complicated, but people's presentation changes all the time. Even if you're staying the same gender, or staying the same like gender presentation, you go from like different stages of like maleness, right? Like you're not always going to wear the same style. You're not always going to act the same. You're going to evolve as a person regardless. Some people evolve to be more feminine at later points. People evolve to be more masculine. Um, so I think that trying to pin people in boxes based off of their brain or body at birth is just like, I don't know. It seems like there's this. Oh my gosh, I'm really loading it on onto you today, but there's a video I watched recently about two spirit people. And in this video, they talk about how indigenous cultures look at identity in like various ways. There's like your Oh my god. I'm not appropriating them. I'm just trying to retell the story. I will link the video below. Go watch the video yourself. Just for everybody else watching this, I really don't want to get claimed that I'm appropriating. But so indigenous culture, well, this video I watched talked about how indigenous people look at a self as their raw version. So that's the one that they are when they're born. Like it's just, essentially just your body, right? No brain. And then like you have your cooked version that cooks over the course of your life. And like as you cook, you're changing, you're constantly evolving, you're constantly cooking. And that cooking process doesn't stop until you're dead. Um and in that way, I kind of think of it as the same here, where like your gender and your sexuality are constantly evolving as you develop new life experience, as you go into new interactions, as you learn more about yourself. Some people, just to give an example from like mainstream culture, there's so many lesbians that like come out as bi at a later point because they were like, well, I thought I was a lesbian, but then like there were and then I started becoming attracted to guys, and there's also bi people that end up becoming gay or lesbian later. Like these labels just describe a specific point in time for somebody rather than like the entire lifetime experiences.
Okay, great. And I need to wrap this up, but I'll just say at the end as well, if anyone listening is interested, we're fomamag.com, and the issue will be coming out next month with all of this stuff. It's primarily a crypto art magazine, but it's now moving into more kind of internet subcultures and things like that. I just want to say thank you so much, Kat, for your time, and have a lovely rest of your day or morning. I'm not sure what time it is where you are.
Yeah, you as well. Have a great day, and thank you for this. I will make sure to link, or make sure you send me the mag when it's out,
Yeah.
and I will link it. And then also, yeah, I will. Okay. Do you want me to put FOMA, or do you want me to put fake?
Fake is going to be what this issue is, but the main brand is Foma. But the website is Foma.
Okay, I'll put both then. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate you answering questions. All right, have a lovely time. All right, bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.